It's a new month, and that means it's time once again for Billy and I to explore another territory. You ready, my friend?
Oh yeah, definitely ready for this one. Yeah, this is one of the ones. If you're not a long time wrestling fan, then you need to clean your ears and pay attention because you're gonna get schooled on some really classic wrestling here.
Yeah, I agree. And this is one of those reasons why we're doing this series, exploring the territory system, because, you know, a lot of the talent in this territory have been lost in the years upon years since they last competed. And I feel like the spotlight should be shined on the Portland territory. At least, even in this, what could be called insignificant way, at least some people will watch it, and at least some people may learn something about one of the top territory, or one of the underrated territories, I should say, in the National Wrestling Alliance. So, I gave you your cue, so go ahead.
Well, Pacific Northwest Wrestling, or PNW, was actually founded back in 1925 by Herb Owens. But Herb Owens didn't just do wrestling; he did boxing. He was an all-around promoter. And his big claim to fame was he promoted a card with Jack Dempsey in the boxing biz. But unfortunately, he passed away in '42, and his son Don took over, and that's really when things picked up for PNW. All this pretty much predates the NWAs, by the way, so far. The NWA was formed in '47, so here we are talking '42. So this is like the foundation of what's to come in the pro wrestling business.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, he was one of the Don Owen was one of the original people on that panel of the NWA when it formed. And that's significant in that, in my opinion, each person on that panel played such a crucial role. I don't think wrestling history would have happened without, if you were missing one of them. You needed all of them.
Yeah.
So once the NWA was formed, then like business really picked up. And if I could just fast forward to the '60s, because that's really when pro wrestling, kind of had their explosion era.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in the '60s, like they just to show you, like PNW promoted a card with Lou Thesz and Gene Kiniski for the NWA World Heavyweight title, and they drew 16,000 people. This is the '60s we're talking about. Like, even by today's standard, that's still a wild number.
I agree. I agree.
1,000.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And this is like one of the most isolated territories in pro wrestling history. Because we're talking Portland, Oregon. That's all the way in, I hate to say the boondocks, but let's be honest, it's the boondocks.
Yeah.
Especially for those of us here in the north, or the east. I'm in the northeast. So, yeah, that's like the boondocks, and they did great, and they hit their stride. They had a TV deal. I kind of skipped ahead. They had a TV deal around '53, around there. I might be a little bit off by a couple of years. So yeah, that all played a role. We were one of the first to be on TV, and even though their TV deal kind of expired in '67. They still really hit the struck because the big names came rolling along. So it wouldn't be too long before they were back on television. And when we talk about big names, hey, you wanna hit on some of these big names?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, like Justin Ventura, Billy Jack Haynes, Jimmy Snuka, Roddy Piper, who, by the way, one of my favorite feuds from PNW was Roddy Piper teaming with Rick Martel versus the Kiwi Sheep Herders, who later become Bushwhackers. But back when they were the Kiwi Sheep Herders, they were a bloody team. And this was like a Nick Bockwinkel, who I think is one of the most underrated pro wrestlers of all time. But that's just my opinion. Stan Stasiak, who held the heavyweight title 8 times. Rip Oliver, who held the title a record 12 times. Brian Adams, who will become Crush and Demolition. And then the two that I also have to mention, Tom Pritchard, which we all know what Tom Pritchard achieving in wrestling nowadays. And Scotty the Body would later become Raven. And without Raven, there would be no ECW, in my opinion. So these are like some notable names that pass through the ranks of the Portland territory, and specifically PNW.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's like a specific wrestler you want to single out.
Well,
there's some good ones there. I couldn't hit all of them.
I mean, I completely agree that there are a few good ones, and I just want to jump back a little bit quick to talk about Don Owens in general, because this guy would take over for his father in 42, you said.
Yeah.
And he would stay as the owner of PNW until the company went out of business. Right around the time I would say AWA was going out of business in the early 90s.
92.
The fact that he stayed with the company for 50 years.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, people say, oh, Vince is doing that now with WWE. Yes, that's different. WWE is a billion-dollar company. PNW didn't even make it out of the Pacific Northwest.
No. Their big expansion, quote unquote, was to promote in Washington. That was their big expansion. But having said that, and this was much later. This wasn't like right away that they promoted in Washington. We'll get to that a little bit. But that was in the 80s. What they achieved being a local territory is just, it's arguably unmatched. Arguably. And it's not just me that feels like they were isolated. Like, I've heard many a Jim Cornette interview on the internet where he considers it the most isolated big territory, like named territory, that produced, great wrestling, great talent. And one of the things that I like that Jim Cornette was mentioning was that Don Owens paid the best for what he threw, like compared to all the other promoters, and that was part of the reason of how he was able to attract so much amazing talent despite being so isolated, was that he paid the best, according to Jim Cornette. So, tip of the cap to Don Owens.
Yeah. That's, I completely agree. And, there's no doubt in my mind that Don Owens was amazing at scouting talent and having an eye for talent. But, but the question that pops up now that I didn't really get, that didn't really pop into my head when we were talking about Texas or Florida, but does actually factor in here, is that PNW normally did shows in a handful of arenas. I know they usually ran their big shows at the Coliseum up in Portland. As a wrestler, is it easier to, in your opinion, as a wrestler, is it easier to run the same arenas in front of the same fans, or is it better to have different fans? Is there a difference between, yes, in a local area it might be better because the people know you, but I guess what I'm asking is, could that be a bad thing, and has that changed over the years where it used to be good, but now it's not?
Well, when you're running monthly shows, it's of course, having that one arena is ideal. Because, getting fans to show up once a month, fans will dedicate one day out of a month for something they love. So, for a monthly show. Once you talk weekly show, it depends on what kind of time slot you have. If you have an hour time slot, you could technically do all your TV tapings in that one monthly show. and then then you can run your hour time slot, your weekly hour time slot that way. But if you're having to do a weekly show where it's 2 hours or I doubt back then they had 3-hour wrestling shows, but 2-hour wrestling shows for back then you have to move around. You have to have more than one arena. And if the city is big enough, where you can do like 1 month, one show on let's say the second week of the month in downtown, and then the one show on the fourth week of the month on the uptown, then you can get away with it. Then you're getting 2 TV tapings out of one show, and then you're just running 2 shows. And that's the way, that's like the old school way. Today, when you're like Impact Wrestling or whatever, you just pick a very populated area that gets a lot of touristy people coming in and out, and you can fill your sportatorium or whatever that way. But that's just modern. You can get the word out easier today with the internet and all that. Back then, when you were relying on flyers, it was a lot different. So running monthly shows in 2 spots would probably be one ideal way, and then running monthly show 1 spot the other ideal way.
Yeah. But as a wrestler, is it like does it get harder, especially if you're I don't want to bury, or if you have the Ric Flair style. Okay. If you have the Ric Flair style of wrestling, and I know that, people would say, oh, Flair's great. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, if you put on the same stylistic match
right.
every time, is it easier having different fans?
I see what you're saying. Especially if you're like a Hulk Hogan, who your matches pretty much, end the same way every time out, which is what I think you're trying to say, where he's going to Hulk up, and he's going to give the big boot, he's going to drop the leg. Pretty much every match looks the same, more or less. As a pro wrestler, you rely, if you have this standard match that you deliver, you rely heavily on the booking to say, okay, this time the match is gonna end with a disqualification, and you're gonna get jumped by the stable. And this time you're gonna have a double count out, and then the next time is when you'll have the definitive boot, big boot, leg drop, 1, 2, 3, and you have your standard ending. You rely heavily on that. If that's your style. But to me, the big deal is if you're only working twice a month, man, it's hard to pay rent that way. Like, you need to work every week to make ends meet. And so I would say it's, if we're going to get specific about Pacific Northwest, I would say what this was great for is because it was so isolated. You could be a babyface in Florida and be a heel over here, and you can learn both styles, and now you're good to go in any territory. So, or you could have you can start a gimmick in Florida, or start a gimmick, better say in Portland, figure it out, and then introduce it in Florida where it's better known and it gets more publicity, and it's already fleshed out in Florida. So that's kind of what was great about Portland, was how isolated it was and how you could work on things. So it wasn't so much like people in their prime in Portland, because it kind of would go throughout the NWA once you got into your prime. You got booked in all the territories, but you would cut your teeth and learn a lot in Portland. You would learn. That was a great place to become a professional.
Yeah. That's where I know a lot of Dallas people went up there from the talent exchange with Dallas and World Class. With Dallas and Pacific Northwest. And go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and vice versa. Like Chris Adams and King Parsons came down from Portland, so there was some great talent exchange. But yeah, I see where you're going with this. You're right. Like the talent would go there and learn, and then come back and become superstars.
Yeah, yeah. You know, especially with the fact that most people know Chris Adams for his stay in Dallas rather than his stay in Portland.
That's perfect point. Perfect point.
And where, actually Iceman too.
Yeah. Where they learned, they became professionals, they got their gimmicks together, they figured everything out, and then they went down where the big publicity and the career could be built, on a national scale, and they became stars. They became superstars.
Yeah. Well, now to break into the performers, the wrestlers who got put in their time in Portland, and to instead of starting with the person that everybody would start with when discussing the Portland territory, we're going to start with basically to stay on what we've been discussing. A particular family made it big out in Portland before the son broke out on his own, and that's Tony and Matt Bourne.
Yeah. Did you say Blanchard or Bullard? Sorry.
Bourne. Matt Bourne?
Oh, Matt Bourne, yeah. Okay, yeah, because, much later, the Blanchard brothers, and I don't know why they got confused with that's a totally different story. But, the Bourne, this is one of these families that you really don't hear about today. Back then you did, but today you don't, which is unfortunate. I guess nobody continued carrying the torch. But, but then also, here it is what we were talking about, how Portland is such an isolated territory. That's also part of it too. So, the Bourne family, they not only, were a mainstay in P&W, but, they were one of the draws. They were one of the people that were go-to for Don Owens and the whole booking crew there. They were, and then because of what they achieved, that was a launching pad for Matt Bourne, who for those who don't follow the early WWF, he was in WrestleMania 1 for crying out loud. Matt Bourne. And I don't know if you want to continue with Matt Bourne's more famous persona.
Well, what I will say is that we will also discuss Matt in the Mid-South when we discuss Bill Watts in the Mid-South territory, so maybe we could leave that for then, because that's closer to when he did end up jumping to the WWE. But what I can say is that in my interaction with Matt, because I actually was lucky enough to interact with Matt.
Nice.
I mean, some people may say he has an attitude. I just think he's a traditionalist because he's the same as other people who have been brought up in the business. And unfortunately, my interaction with him was shortly before he passed away. So what I can say is, in my interaction with him, he was very, very nice to me. I asked him to do an interview. He said yes. That is also before I actually, started doing video interviews. So his would have been an audio interview, not an audio interview. It would have been a written interview. But from my experience, I have nothing but good things to say about Matt Bourne, so, it's just an untimely passing.
Yeah. Just to briefly touch on, pro wrestling takes so many bumps, so many hits, that to me and to many people, in the business that I talk to, it's not a surprise that we lose so many so soon.
Yeah. Well, the move to something more positive and something that I actually believe you didn't talk about when you were covering talent to work in PNW, and that is Ed Wizakowski and Playboy Buddy Rose.
Well, Buddy Rose, he was probably the guy in PNW. I knew that was going to come up. That's why I was kind of throwing it to you at the time, because I was kind of serving you tossing a cookie to you, Playboy Buddy Rose. But both guys are great. But the guys who I really, really, really want to harp on is Playboy Buddy Rose, because while other guys were coming and going, he was there and he was the draw. He was the draw for a while, not even for like a few cards. He was the draw for a while. And when you talk about the Portland territory, you don't get far without bringing up Playboy Buddy Rose at some point. And for those that maybe don't have access to those matches, you'll find it on the internet. It's the internet nowadays. He's definitely worth seeing. There's a lot that several wrestlers have borrowed from. That several more known wrestlers have borrowed from Playboy Buddy Rose. I'm not going to spoil too much, but when you see it, you'll be like, "Oh my God, that's where it came from." Yes, that's where it came from, people. He's the man. I just gave away too much. Damn. Because to be the man, you gotta,
Yeah. I mean, I
gave away too much.
Just to echo the talent of Buddy Rose, just look no further than his gimmick when he was in WWE, of a similar type to what the Hollies did during the Attitude Era. If my memory does serve me correctly, that was Buddy's gimmick when he was in WWF at the time, after his stay in PNW. But even after his time in WWE did come to an end, he did go back.
He went back. In fact, you can't even say he ever left, really, because while he was working at WWF, he would still, he would still come, and whether it was cutting an in-ring promo to help promote the show, or even just behind the scenes, he was still a presence, is what I'm trying to say. He was still a presence in the locker rooms and in the goings on of PNW. So you could say he never really left. It was just sort of because he was under contract with WWF at the time. Like when it came to like televised performances, his televised performances belonged to the WWF.
Yeah.
But having said that, like he was always his heart and soul is PNW through and through.
Well, could this be another case of a promoter that Vince had respect for? Because I know over time, even though I know it was his dad that had massive respect for Eddie Graham, you noticed that it was Jim Crockett that took over the Florida territory, and that was really one of the places that Vince shied away from in Florida. And I know that there are reasons why Vince shied away from Oregon and Washington. I know there is because of strict laws from the State Athletic Commission. But would you agree with the idea that maybe Vince had massive respect for some promoters from his father, and that made him not want to go into their territories?
Yeah, not only massive respect, but he'll never admit it, but maybe even a little bit of fear, like of what the backlash would be if they were to invade certain individuals, certain territories. So it's respect, it's a little bit of fear. There's definitely certain people that made the business that I'm gonna just put it out there, you don't F with. Putting it bluntly. And Don Owens was one of those guys.
Yeah.
If he were still alive today and still promoting, I guarantee you Vince wouldn't F with him.
Yeah. I mean, there is no doubt that Vince did steal from Don Owen, but would you say that maybe he didn't steal as much from Don as he did from other places, which could also be indicative of his respect for Owens?
Oh, for sure. And when we say steal from Don, let's be honest. If Don would have been just a little bit of a bastard, he could have kept a lot of that talent. But, you know, he was Mr. Generosity that would pay people more than any other promoter. He allowed people to learn their craft, and if they were a heel over here, and they wanted to be a babyface with him, he let it happen, or vice versa. Like, so he wasn't a ball buster. So, the talent that Vince took was with the blessing of Don Owens. It wasn't that Vince walked in and said, I'm taking him, and him. Like, he didn't people who know Vince today, like, probably can't comprehend that back then, Vince was not that same person yet. He wasn't that person yet. He was still, there was still, like I was mentioning, certain people that he wouldn't mess with. And Don was one of those people that he wouldn't mess with. So it happened with Don's blessing.
Yeah. Well, it would be before we get to you know who, because you're going to talk about Portland, you got to talk about him, but before we get to him, because I think I would prefer maybe ending this conversation talking about him, there are a few other people to talk about, namely the Night Stalker, Bryan Adams, and just talking.
I love Bryan Adams.
Talking about him a little bit. Yeah. Well, I was just gonna say, what are your thoughts on Bryan Adams?
Well, the guy unfortunately didn't get his just due when he arrived at the WWE because Axe and Smash, which were a Road Warrior ripoff, went over. It just did. Most Warrior ripoffs don't go over. Demolition did. And then Crush was that guy replacing Axe because Axe was getting up there in age and his injuries were accumulating. Mm-hmm. And so he didn't get his just due. But if you look at him in PNW, holy smokes, do you see his talent? Like, you see what other bigger promoters, what Vince McMahon and then eventually Eric Bischoff at WCW, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm forgetting the name of the tag team he had there with
Chronic.
With Adam Buck.
Chronic.
Yeah, what was Chronic? Thank you. Yeah, I can't believe I forgot that. But yeah, you can see what they were thinking when they put Bryan Adams in these spots. Like, he really is a great talent that was underutilized in his career outside of PNW. And unfortunately, PNW is so isolated that we didn't get to see like what Adams had. Like, he was more than just big. He was more than just big. He was agile for his size. He had great charisma, and there was just something about when he would do a move, like when he would do a spot, better said, he just the way he would his mannerisms after the spot would just get the pop from the crowd, and that's what you see in PMW. Maybe it's also because it's a little bit more intimate, the confines. I don't know, but I just believe he was underutilized post PMW. But he's one of those big stars that maybe he was one of the last stars to come out of PMW because unfortunately after Don retired in 1992, there was a big void in Portland wrestling afterwards that, of all the wrestling territories that we talked about so far, this is probably the one territory that has yet to bounce back from the whole Vince taking over the world.
Yeah.
He put a lot of people out of business, and unfortunately, this is one of the people that he put out of business was Don Owens.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I could be wrong, but from what I remember, I think the Malenkos also had a part in the Pacific Northwest in between their tours of Japan. So
yeah, there was so much talent. You mentioned the Malenkos. I actually have written down here so many names that I ran out of space to write. There were so many. It was crazy. Oh man. It's like there was that era when WCW was taking off. We talked about how Vince kind of stole talent. When Don West went out of business, I forget who was running WCW at the time. You could probably remember a little bit here. Think about it.
Bill Watts.
They went in. Yeah, I think it was Bill Watts. Thank you. They went in and they kind of played vulture and just scavenged talent, like like the way a vulture scavenges a dead carcass. And you mentioned the Malenkos. I mentioned Scott Norton. A lot of people that would go on to be part of the Monday Night Wars were scavenged from that, from the wake of Don Owens' retirement and PNW's demise.
Yeah. I mean, just to mesh them together, because just to mesh them together, Scott Norton is one of those guys that, much like a Vader, and also much like Joe Malenko, made it bigger in Japan than in the States.
Yeah.
I mean, hell, Scott Norton was IWGP Heavyweight Champion at one point, and if I'm correct, the leader of NWO Japan, which echoes how highly Antonio Inoki looked at Norton during his time with New Japan, and hell, Scott was even a part of a battle royal on the pre-show of Wrestle Kingdom 11. But also to mention Joe Malenko, from the very little I know about him, from what I've heard, people have said that he was better than his brother.
I've heard that. Yeah. And then you mentioned, continue to harp on Scott Norton. Like here in the States, he was just like a henchman in the NWO that would, when the NWO was losing and getting their butts kicked, he'd come in and clean house. Or when the NWO split from black and white to red and black, he was like the enforcer of the black and white. So yeah, like in Japan they gave him a push. They gave him the big spot, and we saw what he could do with it. So I totally agree with everything you said, and I think part of that was that Scott Norton was arriving in PNW at the time when it was ending. So maybe some of the people that scouted him and brought him over to WCW, not to put down the people that were behind the scenes there. But there were a lot of people in WCW that claimed like they didn't know what to do with him. So maybe because they didn't see how PNW, a long stretch where PNW showed how to handle him and how to promote him, maybe WCW just didn't know what to do with him. And Antonio Inoki, being a better mind, did know what to do with him.
Putting him in a tag team and calling him Fire and Ice. I would say, yeah, they didn't know what to do with him.
Point made.
Yeah. And just to wrap that up with that, Joe Malenko, I mean, I remember talking about it with James Beard, about why certain talent make it bigger in Japan than in the States. I don't remember what he said, but it's just that, I mean, especially back in the 80s, and still to this day, Japan has always been, if you can work, you'll make it. Or you'll have a better shot at making it than if you can't.
Yeah. I totally agree with that, and we're kind of seeing it today with New Japan Pro Wrestling and its explosion with guys like Kenny Omega, and tune in to New Japan Pro Wrestling today, and the product speaks for itself.
Yeah. Well,
here we go. Here we go. Without further ado,
it's Hot Rod time.
Without further ado, the man who everybody talks about when we talk about the pro wrestling territory. Which, by the way, I have a story about him that was conveyed to me by my mentor Johnny Rods. When Johnny back then, when Roddy Piper first broke in, his very first feud was against Johnny Rods, who was going under the name of hold on, I know this, going under the name of Jabba Rook, and it was like a Middle Eastern type gimmick. You know, John, I love the way Johnny tells it. He tells the story way better than I could ever. But then he lived it. You know, Jabba Rook would come to the ring, and this is in Portland. He would come to the ring, and people would snap photos of him, and he would like what are photographs? Like, oh, what was this flash? And he was like this really wild man. And Johnny, playing this wild man, forced Roddy Piper, who was very green. He was a kid, you know. He's family with the Hearts, who even back then had some notoriety. Mm-hmm. And so you know, Johnny couldn't just squash the guy because of where Piper was coming from. So yeah, but that forced Piper's style to match Johnny's style, and so it played a role in Piper's career in that Piper became this wild man brawler for the rest of his career, and it's all because of that. The first feud that Piper ever had in his career in PNW against Jabba Rook. Gotta look it up. Gotta YouTube it.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
I really want to try a Piper impression right now, but I don't know if I can do it the justice of a Bruce Pritchard.
Go for it.
Because Bruce, I mean, if you want to hear a good Roddy Piper impression, Bruce Pritchard does a spot-on impression of Roddy Piper. Everybody plays the Piper. No, that's not. Yeah, I mean, it's like, you know, the high pitch. You know, I mean, everybody knows Piper's voice if you've heard him talk.
Yeah, for sure.
You know,
and the way he cuts his promos is so good, because he'll find something and he'll actually repeat it to himself a couple of times while he formulates the promo in his head. Like, when he tells the story of Jabba Rook, which he tells on the WWE Network, the whole thing, he'll just start out of nowhere. So I cut my teeth in Portland, and Jabba Rook, when I first came into pro wrestling in Portland, Jabba Rook was my first feud. Like, his style, I didn't even do a good imitation, but his style of promo cutting, to me, is on par with Dusty Rhodes. You got Roddy Piper and Dusty Rhodes, and damn you, Vince McMahon, for never feuding the two. Yeah, am I right or am I right?
Wow.
I mean, I give the Crockett's credit. They put Piper and Greg the Hammer Valentine together, and the whole dog collar match ushered in the pay-per-view era, basically, with the first Starrcade. So it did a lot. It did a lot of business. But man, Piper and Dusty, oh, come on. Why? It needed to happen.
That would have been some hard times for Roddy Piper.
If you will.
If you will.
Oh, man. Yeah, Piper for all he's accomplished, and he's accomplished quite a bit. He, when you see him in a Portland territory, and you see, like, his origins, like, you could see how a lot of what he did in Portland was kind of rehashed later.
Yeah.
Like, they would borrow from what he achieved in Portland and say, yeah, we're gonna do that, but, and then they'll just throw somebody else in there and throw a little twist to it or whatever. But yeah, like, a lot of the great stuff that he achieved came from Portland.
Wait. So you're saying Roddy Piper is not from Scotland?
Well, he is a Hart.
Yes, Piper is actually the cousin of the Hart family. I forget how he's related, like who he's related to or who he's the cousin of, but I think his mother's Stu Hart's sister or something like that.
That sounds right.
Yeah, or something like that. But yes, Piper is actually directly related to the Hart family. And actually got his start up in Canada before coming to the States. I remember Piper telling the story of him getting a start up in Canada. I don't remember what company. If I had to guess, it was either Al Tomco or Emile Dupree. Because it was probably on the Portland side of Canada,
right.
I would presume.
Right.
So like Toronto or Montreal. Oh, actually, it might have even been Stampede because of his association with Stu. But yes, Piper actually did get his start up in Canada, and I also may be wrong about this too, but you can attest to this, that Piper actually is Scottish, but from Canada.
Right. Yeah, you know what though? To that I say, does it matter? He was just great. He was great as the Rowdy Scott.
Yeah.
Hogan is not Irish. He's Italian. His name is Terrible Leia. So and I get why they put Hogan and Piper together, because at the time, the Scottish and the Irish were kind of a rivalry, kind of. In the New York area, that is, they were kind of a rivalry. So to put them together in Madison Square Garden was good business.
Yeah.
But having said all of that, whether he's really Scottish or not, it's pro wrestling. I don't care. Somebody could tell me right now that Chief Jay wasn't Native American, and I just roll my eyes if somebody told me that. But
Joe Scarpa's not Native American. Wow. That surprises me.
Well, Scott Hall wasn't Cuban when he was raising Ramon, so I'm okay.
Well, I mean, Scott Hall does an amazing Cuban accent for somebody now from Cuba.
He does.
Yeah.
And I love how he kept certain of those mannerisms when he was back to being Scott Hall at WCW.
Yeah. Yeah. But also, for those who don't know, much like a Kurt Hennig, much like a Larry Zbyszko, much like a Buddy Rose, Roddy actually did win a world title, but it was in Portland with PNW. Off the top of my head, I don't know, and it doesn't really matter how many times Piper held the PNW World Heavyweight title, but he was PNW World Heavyweight Champion, and by far, if not the top draw, one of the top draws for the territory, from the time that he arrived in the territory till the time that he left the territory. And to the day that he left us, he was an icon in the area of Portland. And much like Dusty Rhodes would go on and say, 605 every Saturday night, they'd come up and say how they remember.
You gotta throw in the "if you will."
They'd come up and say how they remember, if you will.
Yeah.
But if you walked up to somebody in Oregon, in that Pacific Northwest area, and you mentioned PNW, they would say Roddy Piper as the first name, and I can basically guarantee that. Or Buddy Rose.
Yeah.
But
Roddy Piper first, then Buddy Rose, yeah.
But I mean, I don't remember how I was the last time, but basically for the entirety of this conversation, I've been giving myself goosebumps talking about some of the things we've been talking about, especially talking about Hot Rod.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, as one of the names that we didn't mention in PNW, since we're mentioning the Hearts and all that, the Dynamite Kid did perform in PNW towards the end. So, so there's more of a heart connection there. And I wouldn't be surprised if somebody were to produce a list of Heart Dungeon graduates that performed in PNW.
Yeah. Well, no, Jesse wasn't. Billy Graham was from the Heart Dungeon, right? Or was it Jesse? I know one of them. I know one of them
yeah,
was. Yeah. I think it was Superstar. Yeah. But speaking of famous family names, the Hennings. Kurt Hennig did perform up in PNW for a bit before WWE. Was it before WWE? No, it was before the AWA.
For the AWA, yeah.
Yeah, it was before AWA.
AWA was a major promotion at the time, and so that meant Kurt Hennig had to go somewhere to learn, and where AWA was based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, so it was natural to stay in the West and go to PNW in Portland, Oregon, to do to learn your craft, and then come over to the AWA. That's why so many big names from the AWA, from Bockwinkel to Mad Dog, Vachon, and so forth, went through PNW. So Kurt Hennig is one of those that, just like I was saying, I ran out of room on my sheet here of names to write. That's how many that went through PNW. So yeah, we could be here for a while just naming all these amazing legends that went through there, and it's one of the unfortunate things that this is a territory that isn't around anymore, because legends are still being made in Florida, and arguably, Texas is starting to return to that form where some big stars are coming out of Texas. Mm-hmm. But Portland, man, we need for some promotion to step up in Portland and bring it back to prominence.
Yeah. Well, just to shout out some other names, just to give them their moment in the sun, and I mean, sure. I'm just gonna list them off from memory, and you could add in anybody you want, because I mean, I know it would be difficult for us to say for you, the viewers, to go watch everybody we're naming. But if you ever want to, binge watch Portland wrestling, you got names like Bull Ramos, and Stan Stasiak was there on commentary, and knowing Stasiak, he probably actually got back in the ring at least once or twice. Go ahead.
He was 9-time PNW world champion. 9 times.
Well, so, that answered my question.
There you go.
Tommy Rogers was up there for a bit. Sheikh Abdul Ali Hussein or Hussein.
Yeah.
I think Chief Thundercloud was up there, and I mean, I thought Bam Bam Bigelow may have been up there near the end of in the early part of his career. I'm not entirely sure.
Neither am I.
But
since we mentioned AWA, people like Rick Bartel, I don't know if I mentioned him or not.
Oh, yeah.
I mentioned him when I mentioned the tag titles with Piper. But
yeah,
like Rick Bartel went on to become the model Rick Bartel, and he's Hall of Fame bound if he isn't already in.
And the Sheep Herders, and which I could be wrong, but that may have been before Jonathan Boyd joined Luke, and before Butch went back to Australia.
Yeah, the name was Brute Miller at the time. It was Brute Miller and Luke. I forget the last name, but he was called Brute Miller at the time instead of Butch. Unless it was a completely different wrestler, I'm not. But I think it was still Butch, but under the name Brute.
Well, and we also mentioned Chris Adams up there too, and the Cuban Assassin. That's the name I couldn't think of. The Cuban Assassin.
Yeah, that's a name that wrestling fans need to look into. The Cuban Assassin. By the time he was in WCW, it was so late in his career where he feuded with Hacksaw Jim Duggan for the TV title on Saturday night, WCW Saturday night. It was so late in the Cuban Assassin's career that he wasn't the same wrestler, but he's another guy that if you look at his forehead, you can see the wars.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And just looking at him, you could see all he's given to it, and, names, just to list it out, a name that I mentioned with, James Beard was Bugsy McGraw and Al Madrill.
Yeah.
The Guerreros were up there. Raven would be mad if we didn't mention the grappler Len Denton, and Dick Murdoch was up there too. Dickie Murdoch. Raven tells a story on the podcast how Dick Murdoch used to throw beer bottles out the window of the moving car and try and hit stop signs.
Wow. Wow, just wow. Yeah.
The Barr family.
Yeah, I think you just mentioned the Guerreros. Hey, where have the Guerreros not been? Thank you.
That's true. The Barr family was up there. Ric Flair, obviously, from his time with...
he's another guy who's been everywhere. If the NWA was there, Ric Flair was there.
You know, Mean Mike Miller, which I kind of feel bad that we didn't mention him when we were talking about other big name guys. You know, you mentioned Tom Pritchard, Kendo Nagasaki was there, John Nord, Rip Rogers, the gentleman, that's not it. No, that's not his name.
Rip Oliver.
Yeah, what? I forget what Rip Rogers' nickname is.
Okay.
The Sawyers were up there. Bart, Brett, and Buzz. David Schultz. Tiger Jeet Singh from Canada came down. Slaughter. Doug Summers, obviously, from his association with Buddy Rose. Jay Youngblood, Tom Zank. Jules Strongbow was there. You mentioned Jimmy Snuka earlier. I actually noticed that Gino Morella, Gorilla Monsoon was there.
Wow, yeah. Gorilla Monsoon.
I'm not really surprised to see that Pat Patterson spent some time in Portland. You know, the Simpson brothers, Steve and Sean. I think this is Fred Ottman's son. Oh no, it's Chris Taylor. I thought it was Fred Ottman's son, but it's not. But, also the Barr family. Art Barr, Sandy Barr was a referee up there, and Jesse Barr. You know, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I mean, you know, just to name somebody else that came up from World Class, and that's Eric Embry.
Right.
You know,
yeah.
So much talent, so many names. It's like, I mean, the only territory I could probably compare it to is Memphis.
Right. Well, yeah, Memphis is still going, which is something, which brings me to what I was saying earlier, is that, man, it would be nice. It'd be nice if some promotion were to step up and start, you know, and bring that territory back to prominence. That's not to say that wrestling doesn't happen there.
Yeah.
Of course, you know, you got indie wrestling promotions there. There were several people that came after Don Owens. Let me see if I can get some of these names up here. That happened after Don Owens. I think you mentioned Sandy Barr already. How he continued on, and by the way, before I get too far, you mentioned the arena where they used to hold their main shows from. Well, once Don Owens retired, it eventually got sold to a church who remodeled it into an office building. So, yeah.
I actually did hear about that, but at least I remember one comment saying, at least it's still up, unlike the Sportatorium.
Yeah.
But continue.
Yeah, Sandy Barr would eventually close his doors, and that's basically where we kind of stand right now, where we don't really have. I mean, some might say Frank Cleverson continued on, or Don Cross, but they're not in the same league. Like, no offense to those guys. But we need, we just need somebody to step up and make that territory prominent again. And I still believe that even though the WWE is global, that I still believe that the WWE has, with their existence of NXT, has basically conceded that the territory format is still valid. It's still relevant today. So let's see some of these territories come back to prominence.
Yeah.
Some of them have never left, but Portland is one that I'd love to see come back.
Well, I do know that NWA Bluegrass, I believe, is the name of the territory up there, but I do know that they have some of the old Portland territory titles, like, I think they may have the Portland territory titles, but I'm not too sure, so if anybody wants to check me on that, go ahead. That NWA Bluegrass is up there, but I do agree with you that they're not on the level of where PNW was, and because of how isolated, like you've been mentioning, that territory is, it could be easier for them to make it where they could be a staple of that area, like it once was. And the last question I want to ask you is the same question I always ask you. What legacy did Portland leave behind?
Wow. Well, their legacy was that is multifaceted in this case. Number one is that they were part of the formation of the NWA. And without that formation of the NWA, we would have none of the industry that we have today. None. So that's extremely significant. Mm-hmm. And then number two is the talent that they put out. Without it, pro wrestling wouldn't have grown to be the global phenomenon that it is. The WWE wouldn't have been able to be a national product. WCW wouldn't have been able to be a national product. And again, the industry wouldn't look like what it does today. So that's significant, and that it was one of the key territories, along with Florida and Texas and Memphis. To me, there are other territories, but those four are like the four pillars of the business, in my opinion.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, Portland is the one pillar that's it's basically in ancient ruins right now.
Yeah.
I would love to see it remodeled and refurbished and be back to being one of the four pillars.
Yeah, I agree. So with that being said, another territory is down. And you'll have to stay tuned for next month to find out where me and Billy are headed. But with that being said, if you like the video, feel free to leave a like and let us know your thoughts on the Portland territory and Portland today. Because as always, feedback is more than welcomed and appreciated. But if you don't want to leave a like, you can subscribe to the channel for more content just like this that you can only find right here at Wrestling Express. And before we go, as always, thank you to Billy Garcia for joining me as we explore another territory.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. I love it.